So we can't really talk about importing data into Elasticsearch without talking about Logstash. Basically, it sits between your data and where you want to put it. And commonly, that will be between a log file being generated on a web server somewhere and Elasticsearch in the context of this course. But Logstash is actually much more flexible than that. It can import data from pretty much anywhere. It doesn't just have to be local files. It can be coming from some other system entirely, like Kafka, or some distributed file system like S3 or HDFS or something like that. And it can put it not just in Elasticsearch, but other places at the same time, like Amazon Web Services, or to a Hadoop cluster, or some database like MongoDB. It can actually import things from more than one source at a time and output it to more than one destination at a time. So it's a very powerful tool for pushing your data around, basically ingesting data from some distributed fleet of things that are generating lots and lots of data and funneling it into some system where it will be archived and analyzed later on. And it's more than just plumbing. It can also do things like deriving structure from your unstructured data. So in the case of parsing web logs, for example, Logstash can parse out those web log lines and actually structure them into fields that have given names. It can filter out data as it passes through it. It can transform data. It can do things like anonymize personal data as soon as it sees it, or even exclude personal data entirely. That can be very important for legal reasons if you want to make sure that you're not transferring personally identifiable information around your network unnecessarily. It's a big deal. You can also do geolocation lookups. So for example, that can take a look at the access logs from a web server and automatically figure out where that log entry came from just based on the IP address that was logged. It can scale across many nodes. So part of the power of Logstash is that it can serve as sort of a buffer between these systems that are generating your data and where you want to put it. So if you have a big load spike on your web server fleet, that doesn't necessarily have to translate into a spike in actually transferring that data into Elasticsearch or somewhere else. Your fleet of Logstash hosts just serve as sort of a buffer between those two systems. Logstash does guarantee at least once delivery, and if you want to take a look at the complete list of plugins available for Logstash, you can follow that link there. But here's a sampling of just how versatile it is. You can see that it's not limited to local files or even the Elastic Beats framework or anything else. There's a huge list of data sources that you can have Logstash listen to or watch or transform and then feed that data to other systems. And pretty much anything you can imagine here, any protocol. You can just have data being published on HTTP, or you can talk to some database or S3 or whatever you want. There's a lot of common systems on here that you might find useful. And it also has a huge variety of output destinations as well. You can see that Elasticsearch is just one of many possible destinations that you can send things to. You can send it pretty much anywhere you want to. So Logstash is a very flexible and very powerful system. Just can't say that enough. Now, typical usage in the context of Elasticsearch will look something like this. So the modern way of doing things, if you're going to be doing something like publishing web logs into an Elasticsearch cluster for visualization later on, would be to install a lightweight client called Filebeat on the individual web server hosts. And then Filebeat would send data to your Logstash cluster, which would then buffer that up and parse things out and do geolocation and things like that, and then send things into Elasticsearch to be indexed. Sort of a legacy way of doing things would be to just use Logstash directly on your actual web servers and do all of the parsing and imparting of structure and geolocation actually on the web server hosts themselves. Obviously, that's not quite as resilient of a system, but that's kind of the old-fashioned way of doing it, where you just have a Logstash listening to local files, actually listening directly to your access log or your error log or both on each individual web host, and then publishing that data directly into your Elasticsearch cluster. Either way works. Again, the more modern way is to use Filebeat, which is part of the Beats framework, to talk to Logstash. Then Logstash is sort of an intermediate layer. Now, if you don't have Filebeat, that gets back to what we call the ELK Stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, where the L stands for Logstash. But these days we actually use what's called the Elastic Stack instead, because it's really more about using the Beats framework than Logstash. We'll talk about Filebeat and the Beats framework in more detail later on in the course. For now, however, let's set up Logstash on the individual hosts that we have.